Good evening, everyone. Thanks a lot for joining us tonight for this very special webinar for all of you Texas runners training with Run On. I'm Varun Sriram with Generation UCAN, and I'm joined by Karin Hosenfeld tonight, board certified sport dietitian, vice president of nutrition for Generation UCAN. Hey, Karin, how you doing tonight?
Hey, I'm doing great. I always love when you introduce me. It sounds so professional.
That's right, Karin. I got to let people know that you're about to bring them a wealth of knowledge here on all things a marathon nutrition and training nutrition. So tonight I'm going to let Karin run the show and turn it over to Karin. She's going to give you guys a ton of great information about pre and post workout nutrition, both for training and for your everyday life. And then towards the end, feel free to ask your questions throughout in the GoToWebinar chat. I'm going to kind of take a look and compile some of your most common questions, and we'll pose them to Karin at the end. So she's going to give you about 45 minutes of knowledge, and then we'll leave the last few minutes for questions. So Karin, with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Varn, you forgot my most important credential, which is native Texan. Shout out to all my native Texans out there. I'm actually here local in the McKinney area, North Dallas, so I know kind of what you all are going through as far as the temperatures, the weather, environments, things like that when you're running around here. And I've had the pleasure, and I'm so excited to be talking to you today because I've had the pleasure of working with runners and endurance athletes, triathletes for the last 12 years. So I've had my ins and outs of things that have worked, haven't worked. There's two things that you need to know. One is that there's some standards in sports nutrition. There's some things that we absolutely know for sure. And then the exciting thing, and sometimes frustrating thing for athletes out there, is that things change too. The things that we learn and that we know change and morph over time, which I find exciting to be on the cutting edge and to know those things. So those are some of the things that I want to share with you as well. I definitely want you to know that we have several different things that we're going to talk about today, and it's a lot of information. So I know that you'll have some questions at the end. Feel free to ask them now. Varn's going to compile them and he's going to ask them to me at the end. Don't be shy if you have any questions, and you can also contact me afterwards if you need to. We'll go ahead and post my email address in the chat so that you can ask me questions, especially if they happen to be really individualized questions, because what you're going to see here is kind of an overview. There might be some new information for you if you've been a runner for a long time. There will definitely be some new information if you're a new runner. So, but it definitely is an overview, kind of generalized nutrition, but it's things, again, that I've learned over the years, over the past 12 years working with endurance athletes. And it doesn't matter if you're running, 2 miles, 5 miles a day, or 10 or 20. So it's still, these are things that still apply. I do have to tell you, there is an old school way of thinking about fueling for marathoners and long distance runners, and there's a new school of thinking, and not everyone is yet in tune with the new school, and we know that, and I know that as a dietitian there's lots of my colleagues that are still not yet in tune with that. And most of all, it's not because they're closed-minded to that, it's because they haven't worked enough with runners and endurance athletes to really know a lot of the new schools, even science that's out there. So I definitely want to give you that bit of information. We'll talk about nutrition guidelines for every day, because listen, your recovery from your runs starts the minute you are done running. So every single thing that you do post run and leading up to the next time you're exercising sets the tone and is, those nutrition guidelines, that is your recovery nutrition. So it's really huge. Just your everyday nutrition is where I see most people falter, and then they want to know, well, how come I'm not performing the way that I should? And then we look back at assessing, what are you doing in the everyday? So I can't stress enough how critical that is. Your pre-exercise nutrition, what do I have beforehand? Even, a couple hours beforehand, that's super important. Obviously, that sets the tone as well. but you can't out-supplement a poor diet. So we're definitely going to talk about that first. Then hydration. Hydration is massive. Obviously, we have this issue in Texas because sometimes it's super humid outside, other times it's dry. There's certain things that you have to understand about hydration that are absolutely key, that are major, major reminders to you, and some new information as well. So we can't leave that out. We focus on the macros. People want to know how many carbohydrates and proteins and fats should I have and when should I have them. So we're definitely going to take some of the guesswork out of that. And then we're definitely going to talk about Generation UCAN as well. There's a component of that, things that you need to know about Generation UCAN if you're going to be using it. But in general, my talk will cover both in case, for whatever reason, I can't think of a good one, but for whatever reason, if you're not using Generation UCAN, then there is still some content here for you as well. So let's jump in. When you go to see a sports dietitian like myself, what they will do is calculate your calorie needs. We just want to know in general how many calories do you need? And I like to put this in your hands because it's super important that you understand what your basal metabolic rate is. You can actually calculate it yourself. So it takes some of the guesswork out of it. A lot of times runners will go with what is intuitive, which is, hey, am I losing weight? Am I gaining weight? Do I have good energy during my runs? Do I not? And just kind of feel your way through the dark with that. But we as sports dietitians will look and actually run some of the numbers. When you get your basal metabolic rate, you've got this nice long equation there, then you're going to multiply it by your activity factor. This is so important. I can't even stress this enough because this is one of the major, and it's why I put this the first slide. It's one of the major mistakes that most runners that have come to see me have made, which is this. They're fueling on their off days or their off season just like they would as if they were still running a 15 or 20 mile day. And it's really not even, I mean, light years different. So if you look, so even sedentary, little or no exercise, on your rest days, consider that you might not be a sedentary person in general, you're an active person, but that day is your rest day. So your activity level and your calories are going to be different. Hugely important. A lot of times people will come to me and they're having weight management issues. I have marathoners, triathletes who come to me and they're 30 or 40 pounds overweight, and it's, an issue where they're just trying to move around easier and don't understand why they're carrying all this extra weight when they say, hey, I'm a runner, why am I carrying all this extra weight? And it's really because they're not calculating their activity factor very well. So definitely want you to make a note of this slide, and you'll have this recording so you can go back over it again. So on average, these are just some very general basics. These are for people who, on the days that they do run, maybe 5 miles or more, they're moderately active, and this is how many calories they might need. I put an asterisk at the bottom, actually 2, saying it's not individualized. So you might go to see someone like a sports dietitian and they might say, oh gosh, you're 140 pounds, 3,200 calories is a lot. Well, it might be based on your own metabolism. You might have a fast or slow metabolism. So it's not individualized, just kind of a general rule of thumb, because it's kind of good to have an idea. So let's jump into some healthy eating guidelines. I'm going to run through these kind of quickly because in general, you can look up the amounts. These come from the USDA as far as the amounts. It's a very standard system that all dietitians use no matter what, and it tells us what the actual portion size of things are. It's going to be different for runners, how much they have, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. But basically, we're looking at your grains, and this is the starchy side of your carbohydrates that I can't stress enough. All the time, 24 hours a day, no matter what time of the day it is, I hope that you will choose, except in that window right before your run, I hope that you will be choosing whole grains. I always say to athletes, choose your carbohydrates wisely. We really want to stay away from the simple sugars and really focus more on whole grains. Why is that? This is the new school of thinking and understanding that even with athletes, do you know how many times have you heard people say, well, I work out or I run, I can eat whatever I want? It's really about controlling your blood sugar. And I say this because even the top professionals with the best PRs, and they're constantly breaking their own records, they are so in tune with their blood sugar that a lot of times the old school thinking of eating simple sugars is not really something that the new school of thinking really is advising. So definitely, and here's some examples of those: whole grain bread, whole wheat pasta, when you do eat them. And hey, I just want to point out, look how small some of them are. We're talking about half a cup of whole wheat pasta. So really, and you know, I put at least half of this group should be whole grains. I really say for runners, you know, if you can focus on all whole grains, that's great because it helps you to control your blood sugars. Another great source, a low carbohydrate source, is vegetables. And here you'll see recommending 5 servings a day. I met one guy who came to me once who actually was eating, in the 12 years, who was eating the amount of vegetables per day that he should be, that we all should be. And that's 5 or more. So it's really important to start focusing on that. What do vegetables give you? Fiber. So again, we're talking back to the fiber. How do you control your blood sugar? When you do that, and why is that so important for runners? When you do that, controlling your blood sugar even throughout the day, let's say you go for a morning run and we're talking about dinner here and I'm talking about vegetables to help control your blood sugar. It's so important because, like I said, your recovery starts the minute you're done running, and we want to keep you at your metabolic peak. We want you to be a hybrid machine, burning both body fat and the food that you take in. And this is the best way to do it, is have a good amount of fiber in your day. So we're really concentrating on that. Fruit has fiber, but we want to watch out because fruit also has sugar. So you'll see that on the very bottom, I put in a clickable link to the Harvard School of Medicine on their lower glycemic foods. And actually they have a list of foods. The scale is 0 to 100 as far as how high the glycemic load is. Glycemic load is highest in, for example, a piece of white bread. The piece of white bread is going to be close to 100, and everything else is kind of measured against that. So even when you're talking about fruits, a serving or 2 a day, that's where we're looking for the lower glycemic ones, things like berries. So just for kind of a nice little homework assignment, I would recommend going on there, taking a look, and seeing which ones maybe are your favorite or that you might be a little high on, and just to kind of rein those in a little bit. Again, it's about blood sugar control. When you're talking about getting in your fiber, it's vegetables really that you're supposed to be choosing. So the fruit is, we say sparingly, and I really say limit that fruit juice you'll see right on there. Just limit that. Dairy, 3 servings per day. I usually look for something that has a good amount of protein. So if you see, for example, yogurt, we're talking about Greek yogurt, 12 grams of protein or so in about a cup, and Icelandic skyr. And skyr is great. Skyr is basically a concentrated yogurt, and it's full of protein, so really great to include those as well. If you do include dairy, I should say. It's not mandatory that you do, but if you include dairy. Protein. Protein for runners, I would say, is one of the things that is so not focused on, and it's really a shame. And I really do focus on this with my endurance athletes, because you want to definitely save your muscle mass that you have and not eat through that. But a lot of runners don't really think about the importance of protein, and it definitely is super important. So if you notice here, I've got 4 or more servings per day, and you can see on the second bullet point, it really kind of gives you an idea of how many grams that is. We're talking about 1 gram or 2 of protein per pound of body weight. If you're talking, let me give you kind of some general ideas on that. If you're talking about running, a lot of running, but not necessarily lifting any weights whatsoever. And even if it's your own body weight, if you're not doing any squats or things like that to condition your legs and you're purely running, then we're closer to 1 gram. If you sometimes do some conditioning, even upper body exercises or calisthenics with your own body weight, then you should consider going up to 2 grams of protein per pound of body weight. It measures out to somewhere around 120 to 150 grams for women per day, and 170 to 190 grams per day for men. And again, those are just general ranges. You can kind of figure out on your own what you need based on your body weight. Here's some examples of some good sources of protein. Sometimes people forget about things like peanut butter, nuts, just to kind of mix those into your diet because they're healthy fats as well. And then eggs too, don't be shy of the eggs. They're a great source of protein that actually all other sources of protein are measured against. So I think you've gotten the point here that I really do believe protein is extremely important for conserving your muscle mass. Now, one added extra point, if you happen to be over 40 and you're listening to this, then you are really closer to the 2 grams of protein per pound of body weight per day. And I would highly recommend, there's a ton of studies out now that are showing that if you take a source of protein, even if it's something like half a cup of cottage cheese or a protein powder or something like that, before you go to bed at night, it actually helps you throughout the night with your muscle synthesis. So just something really important to consider. It helps you get another little dose of protein in, but we found even that sleeping at night, it does help with that. And we have a ton of anecdotal stories about people coming up to us and telling us that they do a protein powder and also a scoop of UCAN because both help to control their blood sugar throughout the night and help to not waste away their muscles. So highly recommended your protein at night as well and throughout the day. Your healthy fats, this is extremely important as well. I know that typically, and it's a more of an old school way of thinking, and we'll discuss that here in a moment. I know typically it's all about the carbs with runners. It's the carbs, carbs, carbs. We really want to challenge that, and we challenge that as a company too because we have the science behind us to show that you can actually have a healthy amount of fat and protein that can also help to fuel your runs and long runs and workouts. So 25% to 30% of your daily calories, they can come from fat. I still recommend foods that are lower in saturated fat, although if you're mixing in things like MCT oils, coconut oils, things like that, I just say don't put all your eggs in one basket. Have a variety of oils. You can still have, a tablespoon or so of your coconut oil per day if you like to cook with it or put it in smoothies. Don't be afraid to do that. I just want to definitely highlight the olive and canola oil because they're mono and polyunsaturated fats that are healthy for you. I just put in a little rule of thumb here for sweets. Take them on special occasions. Don't be one of those people that says, well, I run and I can have my dessert or whatever. I do run into a lot of people who say, that's the only reason I work out, so I can have my sweets. So don't be that person because what happens is it puts you on that roller coaster, that blood sugar roller coaster, that so many people don't actually even realize how badly it affects their bodies, but it makes them fatigued. I would say across the board, if you posted on your Facebook page and asked people, how often are you tired? In a day or a week, most people out there are fatigued. I just know it after working in, this population for 12 years across the board, general population. Don't be on that roller coaster just because you have a sweet tooth and because you think you can afford it because you're running. Here's what the runner's plate might look like. So I had mentioned to you those things, vegetables, carbs, protein. How much are we supposed to have? It's just easy in this case. To talk about a runner's plate. Guess what? It looks like a picnic plate now, but if you're, for example, in your off season of training, or God forbid you got an injury and for 12 weeks you're not running, I deal with a lot of those people as well. And what happens in that case is that your whole grain, high fiber carbs section of your picnic plate actually gets a little smaller. I'm sorry for the bad news, but you don't need even as much as that fuel, so it goes down as well. But look at what half the plate is, vegetables. It's high fiber. You still also get some healthy carbs in there as well. Don't forget the protein. And this is for each time you sit down. So if you're having 4 to 6 ounces minimum when you sit down to eat, you know, it's at least it helps you get towards your goal of what you should have in a day, which was that kind of 120 to 150 if you're a woman, and 170 to 190 grams of protein per day if you're a male. Healthy fats, I noted on the lower right. And I might still be a little bit old school. I know sometimes people run fasted. I don't find a need to run fasted anymore. I think that, you know, definitely it was my last bullet point on this slide actually. I was one of those people that had to run fasted. Maybe one of you is like that out there right now, which is that it hurts to run, or you get cramps if you're running, if you eat anything. Man, I know for me, I would eat half a banana and cramp up within the first mile. It was so bad, and it's how I got actually introduced to UCAN. So eating breakfast, whether it's something light before you run, or even if you're going to run later in the day, and you're going to eat a healthy breakfast, it helps to jumpstart your day. I know that there's studies out there on intermittent fasting. What we've found is this, we're talking about fasting for approximately 24 to 48 hours. We're not talking about, oh, hey, I'm going to skip breakfast and then I'm going to be healthier. It's the absolute cutting edge information that we have, that fasting is for much longer periods of time. And that is information for another day for us to talk about. It aids in weight management if you're eating breakfast. It keeps your furnace burning. It keeps your body used to receiving this energy. We just, again, want to make sure that it's the right kind of energy. Blood sugar stabilizing, make sure you get in your healthy fats, and that good amount of fiber. I cannot stress the fiber enough. By the way, I do keep stressing fiber, and don't jump into it tomorrow with 30 grams of fiber. Make sure, and that is the recommendation, by the way, up to 30 grams of fiber. Make sure you kind of ease into it if you're not eating high fiber now, because otherwise you'll get gas, bloating, cramps, and you'll hate me. So make sure that you start off slowly with your fiber, and within a week you should be up to 30 grams or so. Really good apps out there that you could download, like MyFitnessPal or even Calorie King. Calorie King is great. You can look up basically any food item. There's tens of thousands of them, and even restaurants. So you can see how much dietary fiber is in the foods that you're eating. And because I didn't mention it, let me give you a little bonus information that I definitely share with everyone. Sorry, I don't have a slide in here for it. When you're looking up dietary fiber on your nutrition facts label, make sure it says 10% or more on the foods, like those carbohydrate foods that you know should be containing some fiber. 10% or more, and then you know it's a healthy choice. Let's talk about pre-exercise nutrition. I'm rolling through these pretty fast, so if you have any questions, make sure you ask Varn, post it in the chat to Varn, and he'll be asking me at the end. I can't wait to get your questions. So let's talk about pre-exercise nutrition. So here's the #1 rule. Hopefully you've already learned this. You've probably learned it, hopefully not the hard way. I know a lot of people that have, but hopefully you've just learned it by hearing stories of people that learned it the hard way, which is don't experiment the day of your event. Experiment during your training. So people write to me all the time at UCAN, and they want to know, well, how much UCAN should I use, or how much this or that? And I always tell them, same thing, first bullet point, experiment during your training. This is when you want to kind of play with things. So the things that I'm going to recommend to you for pre-exercise nutrition, they're going to, you know, move and shift and change. Some of them are going to work for you, and some are not. That's where each of us has that individualized, you know, it's your body and it's how you're responding to the things that you take in beforehand. But when you do eat the proper things before, it prevents a blood sugar crash. But you're going to see in one of my slides coming up, you need to be sure not to take in certain things that will cause your blood sugar to dip too low. And there are certain things that you can eat or drink beforehand that actually give you reactive low blood sugar. You start running and then your blood sugar dips super low and you feel nauseous. Some people vomit. You feel dizzy. It's just not a good place to be, and it ruins your run, and just, no need for it. So your performance improves based on your pre-exercise nutrition. That's been shown time again in my own practice, and across the board. It's better than going in fasted, for sure. And when you feel like you've had something on board and you aren't feeling hungry and you're having that feeling of satiety, you feel satisfied, you're no longer focusing on, oh my gosh, I didn't feel right, I'm super stressed out, maybe I didn't take the right things beforehand. When you practice them during your training, obviously it's going to help you to decrease that event-related stress. Here's what it might look like. This is gonna, for all of you super early morning runners, you're gonna look at this and be like, whoop, large meal 4 to 6 hours before, I'm not doing that. So it might end up being a lighter meal. This is typically what we see marathoners do before an event. A lot of times, a lot of clients that I work with will wake up, at 4 or 5 in the morning, have something to eat, that lighter meal, and then go back to sleep for a couple of hours, if they can. I know some people have jitters. And then a snack, or I'd be remiss if I didn't mention UCAN half an hour before as your pre-exercise meal timing. So that provides that energy burst. It gives you something to kind of perk you up a little bit. It really varies. I've worked with high school cross-country runners that will eat, and I'm not kidding you, a steak and a gallon of ice cream, and they will go out for an 8-mile run at night. And it just floors me, but they can do that. The intensity of your exercise and your personal tolerance to food is going to really fuel that decision on what you're going to have before you go out there for your run. And sadly, a lot of people might not eat anything before their run because they're just not sure and they don't want to ruin their run. So don't let that be you. Make sure that you get in what you need before you go out. The pre-exercise meal 4 to 6 hours before, we're talking about, for example, if this is lunch and then you're going to go run at 6 or 7 o'clock at night. So that 4 to 6 hours before should be, your lean meats, as I mentioned before, 4 to 6 ounces. When you have your carbohydrates in here, your pasta, rice, roller bread, the old school way of thinking was not that picnic plate that I showed you. In fact, the older school way of thinking was that half of the plate, that picnic plate, should be carbohydrates. The new school of thinking, which we'll talk about here in a minute, is limiting those carbohydrates because you don't need them in such high amounts, 50 to 20 grams. And that's absorbable carbohydrates. You're going to take the amount of carbohydrates on the nutrition facts label, and you can actually subtract the amount of fiber, because that's not absorbed by your body. So that amount of fiber subtracted from the carbohydrates, then you're left with something called your net carbs, and that's really what I'm talking about here, the carbs that are absorbed into your bloodstream. That's going to be around 15 to 20 grams. And if you want to know what that is, you can go back and look at the slide, and we can here in a minute, of the carbohydrates. It's going to tell you exactly what that is. It's 1 slice of bread, it's half a cup of pasta, it's 1/3 cup of rice. So we can always go back and take a look at that again. Make sure you get your vegetables in. Remember, that was half of your plate. You can have, a salad, for example, or cooked vegetables with oil or dressing. And again, those amounts of all of these things are going to vary by the amount of calories that you're supposed to be taking in per day. Obviously, my 6'5" marathon runners are going to be eating a lot different than my petite, 5'2" runners. Let's talk about the difference between the pre-exercise food guidelines between the old school and the new school. And listen, this is something that I learned in school too. For the first 6 years of being a sports dietitian, I did tell people about, eating high carbohydrate or taking something high carbohydrate, especially during runs. And that is something that is old school. It's definitely something that some dietitians still prescribe to because they don't know any different and they haven't been introduced on the board, across the board to UCAN, which is one of my jobs actually, to help them understand that. The new school with Generation UCAN is, and we're going to see how it works, is it keeps your blood sugar low, keeps your insulin levels low enough that it's not spiking your blood sugar. And now you're no longer a slave to needing these high carbohydrate, fast-acting sugars anymore. It's why Run-On offers UCAN as an option as well in the stores. So we want to go low fat and fiber for our pre-exercise food guidelines. Remember, we're talking about before you go for a run, you don't want something high in fat because it's going to come up through your stomach. You have a sphincter that's a muscle that keeps all the food down in your stomach, but fat has a way of getting through that. And you remember if you've had heartburn after eating something like pizza or fried chicken, because that's the fat that's coming back up, and that's definitely going to happen if you're running and you're jostling up and down. Fiber, I think we all know what the effects of fiber are pre-exercise if you get out there, and it's going to hit you at mile 5, like, why did I eat that high fiber or whatever, and you're searching for the closest bathroom or porta potty. Moderate protein, we don't want to go crazy on the protein. Sometimes people tolerate protein really well before a run, and they like to have it on board because it fills them up a little bit. So this is where we had created, and just kind of side information, where we created the UCAN with protein powder in it. It's not a ton of protein. It's about 7 grams of protein in a scoop. And it's just enough to kind of take the edge off if you're going to do it. For example, you left work and you're pretty hungry and you're just about to go for a run. And if you can tolerate it, your stomach can tolerate it, as some people can, then the UCAN with protein and our superstarch is one option. If you don't do the UCAN, then you can still take about half a scoop of protein powder and a carbohydrate, which in this case is still the old school one, which would be something like white crackers or things like that before you run. Difference is it's not going to stay with you as long because that sugar is going to run out, and that's where we look at that possible drop, that low blood sugar drop into your run, which means that people are having to rely then on gels and goos and things like that. We want to free you from that. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Extra fluids, we're definitely going to talk about hydration guidelines here in a moment. And then the appropriate portion size, just watch out, obviously, if your eyes are bigger than your stomach and you eat too much before you go out and run, you know what the effects of that are. So let's talk about that 30 minutes beforehand. So the new school is the scoop of Generation UCAN. I'm going to show you why in a second. The old school used to be a liquid meal replacement, something that would go through you pretty quickly. It would go through your stomach pretty quickly. Unfortunately, a lot of times they're high in sugar, and those things can cause GI distress. And this is where a lot of runners would complain, and why they are akin to UCAN so much, because it's a low GI distress supplement before their workout, their run. So you can do something like a juice or a piece of fruit, but again, if you've tried that and it doesn't set well with you, again, it's because of the high sugar, the high osmolality in that product. Cold cereal, I've had people do this as well. Low fat, granola bar, something of that nature. Again, these are older school options, but if you're not doing the UCAN, then you definitely are needing to do that as some sort of energy before you run. So we really want to focus on what is the solution for that, because when that runs out, then you're having to have something else, and that unfortunately is during the time that you're running. If it's a longer run and an event. So we really want to, again, come off of being a slave to those foods if you can. So, and I mentioned too much sugar can cause that rebound low, where you're out there and you start to get shaky and hungry, and it's because of something that you chose before. So it used to be 6 years ago, before I found out about Generation UCAN, that it was kind of a hit or miss with every person that would come into my office. Let's see how long this will last for you. It lasted, X amount of time for the last guy, but it's not lasting long enough for you. So what else can we do? What can you carry with you? And a lot of that is such a burden to have to go through. It's possible to do it, but I want you to know that there's a better way. So let's jump into talking about UCAN a little bit. Some of you already use UCAN. Some of you use it and love it, but don't really quite understand yet how it works. So we have a rise in the blood sugar level when you're taking in something that that is either a sugary food or a bar that is higher in sugars, or even a piece of fruit on its own, and it raises your blood sugar, but then you're going to come down and crash. And if you notice that line in the middle there, through the middle, it says normal blood sugar level. So your crash is actually going below normal blood sugar level, and here you are not only having that crash, but it's while you're out there running. And this is why people are taking, and it used to be, you know, the recommendation I would give to people too, hey, every 15, 20 minutes, depending on the person, have another gel or a goo. And in this case, the reason for that is because you're dipping so low in that blue area that your body feels like, oh my gosh, I need another hit. And that other hit is in your back pocket, and you're grabbing for, you know, a gel or goo in order to spike your blood sugar again. And when you get it, whew, I feel good. I know I'm going to be good for these next couple of miles. But when it starts to go up, you're feeling good. The minute that it starts to go down, this is when you start noticing, oh my gosh, it's going down. How much time do I have? And here you are trying to run and concentrate on all of the mechanisms of running, and you can't because you're hungry or you're worried. How long is this going to take, you know, for this to last? And we really want to be able to come off of that with UCAN. So we have the science here. We've shown, and this is really what got me 6 years ago when I saw UCAN. I came on board with the company at the beginning of February because I was recommending it every single day to almost every single person that I met, even on the street. It's a beautiful thing, being able to have those stable blood sugars. So what happens is, if you see the red line, when you take UCAN, it gives you a little bump, but you're not really going to notice it that much. People will tell me, yeah, I didn't really notice it. That's good. It doesn't give you that sugar rush. And if you notice at the end of the line, way out at the very end of that red line, that's 3.5 hours out, your blood sugar is pretty close to where you started. Whereas if you're having something like a traditional bar, or a piece of fruit, or a white refined flour, which again used to be something that we would tell people. We would tell them, have saltines, have some animal crackers, have some pretzels, and get out there and run. And those are the things that's going to be your blue line. And those are going to make you feel really good when you start out. But guess what? Then you're crashing and your blood sugar's crashing even lower. And this is when people would come to me for counseling saying, wow, I really, you know, 4 miles in and I was hitting a wall. What the heck is going on? And how do we fix this? So UCAN helps to correct that blood sugar curve, and that's why it's been so great. The other thing for runners is most runners, even the very elite runners that you see, and they're pretty thin out there, and you think, gosh, do they really have any body fat to work off of it all? And they really honestly do, and most of us do have enough body fat that we can become a hybrid machine. So this is where, when your blood sugar is lower and doesn't spike your insulin, so you're on the red line here taking UCAN, it doesn't go up like the blue line, you stay stable, then you're in hybrid mode. You are burning the carbohydrate from UCAN. It's about, you know, 20 grams of carbs in that 1 scoop of UCAN, and it's going to last you a good amount of time. If you're running at a quick pace, it'll last you about 90 minutes or so. If you're a slower paced runner, it's going to last you a little over 2 hours. Again, you need to play with it during your training and see how long it lasts you. But what happens is, when you are using the UCAN, you're burning that, but it's such a small blip that you're forced to, and your body is forced to also burn your body fat stores. So as we see, the more often that you're doing UCAN throughout the day, and I recommend it usually twice a day, but at least once a day, even on the days that you're not training, it keeps your metabolism steady and used to being a hybrid car. So again, we just talk about, and I wanted to show you this slide so you can see what UCAN looks like in the tub and the packet. It's a super starch. It's a very large molecule. It has low osmolality. It exits your stomach quickly, so you don't have GI distress, which was one of the reasons, again, that I started using it years ago. And you can also use it, if you look at that last bullet point, you can use it as a healthy snack. So if you have people in your life that aren't runners, and we all do, who, complain, well, I don't have any control over my cravings and things in the afternoon, or they might be looking for something to help them with weight management and keep their blood sugar stable, UCAN is great for that too. Do them a favor, grab them even just a packet if you can at Run On, and just have them try it just to see. Say, hey, listen, I use this for my runs. Maybe it would help you too. And just so you know, people kind of freak out when they see the 20 grams of carbs on the back of the label, and I always show them. I make sure that I show people when we're in person, hey, listen, I want you to know there's 20 grams of carbs. But remember back on my other slide when it says those 20 grams of carbohydrates will last about 3.5 hours? How long is that half a cup of oatmeal or rice going to last you? How long is that large banana going to last you? Is it really going to last you 3.5 hours? No. I think we all know it'll last, about 30, 40 minutes, and then you're hungry again. So I like to point out, UCAN is not any other kind of carbohydrate that you've ever heard of or used before. So I want to talk a little bit about post-workout recovery. Old school is, having chocolate milk. My goodness. I mean, I used to recommend it as well. But again, it spikes blood sugar. Your bagel spikes your blood sugar. A protein bar. We're looking for things that are really not raising your insulin levels. And a lot of times people would ask me, don't I need these high sugar items after a workout? And you really don't if you're doing the UCAN and you're already a hybrid vehicle. You don't need that bump in sugar and insulin levels. So this is why we recommend Generation UCAN. You can do it with your own personal favorite protein powder, a whole scoop, 20 grams of protein mixed with 20 grams of carbohydrate from the UCAN, which is in one scoop. They're low glycemic again, and it helps you to stay in fat burning mode even longer after your run, which is good for many people who, like I said, come to sports dietitians like myself looking for, how do I lose a little bit of body fat? This is actually the key to doing that. And you want to, again, we're looking at that glycemic index. So if you do take a look at that website URL that I shared with you earlier, eating low on the glycemic index and picking those types of foods and higher in fiber, it's going to continue to have those fat burning effects later. So let's talk about quickly what that might look like. You do your UCAN before your run. You could do another scoop after. This depends on how long your run is. If you happen to be a smaller female, you don't have to have 2 scoops before and after, unless you're not going to eat for a while. Maybe you've got to go home, drive home, change, shower, all of that, and it's going to be a while before you eat. Then you can definitely have another scoop of UCAN with some protein at the end of your run, and go eat a healthy meal that's mentioned here at the end. UCAN doesn't, and this is just another slide to show that as well, that post-exercise UCAN does not spike your blood sugar any more than having protein would, and you're not going to get that insulin surge. And that keeps you in fat burning mode. And by the way, if you just haven't had UCAN before, it's an excellent feeling. It just feels great. So again, we have vanilla. This is a favorite of a lot of people. We have vanilla cream and then chocolate flavors with the protein powder added as well. Let's talk real quick about hydration. Not that it's not important, but a lot of it is a reminder to you. And I definitely want you to reread these slides over as well and share them with people. We're not done with summer here. yet in Texas. We know that's about like October or so. So we really, really want to be very careful. The only thing that I can tell you, number one, absolutely, is that you should be hydrating all day, every day. If you go into your workout or your run and you've got cotton mouth and you're feeling it like, wow, I feel kind of dehydrated, it is too late. And your core body temperature is going to go up because of it. And anytime your core temperature is over 40.5 degrees Celsius, that can lead to heat stroke. That's really no joke. You know, I pointed out to the Allen High School football team the other day that you think that there's some very smart people in the world, like an emergency room doctor, who should know about hydration, but actually there was a doctor from Plano about a month ago at the beginning of August who died inside the Grand Canyon because her core temperature went up. She suffered from heat stroke and she wasn't able to get water and cool her core temperature in time. And it's just a huge reminder to us. We're not in the, you know, center of the Grand Canyon, but it gets hot and you want to avoid your heat illness. Don't get to that point. Besides, if you keep well hydrated, it increases your performance. So I think we all like that. The easiest way to tell, like, wow, am I dehydrated or not, is to just look at your urine. If it's clear to kind of pale lemonade color, you're good to go. Be careful that you're not just drinking water during your workouts, that you're also drinking electrolytes, and we'll talk about that in a moment. I want to be very careful about that and avoid low electrolytes in that situation. So my rules of thumb, I just like to say, when you wake up in the morning, you might even keep a 20-ounce container of water at your bedside, and you're going to drink that first thing in the morning, no matter what, at least to help you to get a leg up and start hydrating. And then even if it's, you know, right before your exercise or a game or whatever your workout happens to be, your run, drink 20 ounces of water. That's 1 to 2 hours. That gives you time to go ahead and pee it out by the time you're going to go for your run. So if you're still at work in the evening before you go home and do your run with your running group, then make sure that you have that 20 ounces of water. And throughout the day, when you check, your urine should be pale lemonade colored. If you're not getting up often to go to the bathroom, then you're probably not hydrating enough. This is just a great recommendation, a reminder. 8 ounces to 10 ounces of fluid every 15 to 20 minutes during exercise. You know, this is, it could be 4 to 6. It depends on if you're a smaller size person or not. But when you get into the heat in Texas, it's definitely closer to the larger amount until, you know, that point where you're feeling sloshy. And just make sure if you're hydrating all day, every day, the way that you should, then you can probably, most likely in the cooler temperatures, take in a little bit less than 8 to 10 ounces. Runners were asking us when we came out with UCAN, our super starch powders, well, this is great. It keeps my blood sugar stable and low, doesn't spike my blood sugar. But then I'm having to drink Gatorade, Powerade, things that have electrolytes in them that I need, but I don't want to spike my blood sugar. Can you guys create a hydration product? So that's exactly what we did. We got together with one of our consulting sports dietitians, Bob Siebehar. At the time he was with USA Triathlon, so he's very well versed in the endurance market, and he himself was an endurance athlete. And he proposed that we put the exact electrolyte components in hydrate, UCAN hydrate, as what is the ratios of the electrolytes in sweat, your calcium, sodium, potassium. And these are very important, but magnesium is one of them that's super, super important. You can see right there in the middle of the screen the added magnesium that we put in there. We put in about twice the amount of magnesium in UCAN that we could or should, because most Americans are magnesium deficient. As you get older, it's much more challenging and to keep that magnesium on board. But also, if you happen to be any sort of athlete at all across the board, the magnesium is hugely important. So we're really happy with our hydrate. You can actually sip it along the course. You can mix it in with your UCAN before, you know, with your super starch UCAN before you work out. You can have it throughout the day if you're feeling that your hydration is low. and you know, your sodium levels. If you are not eating a high sodium diet and you just feel like you're a salty sweater and you need to replete some of that sodium, the hydrate products are great products for doing that, and they're new at run-on, so definitely take advantage of that. And again, there's no sugar, so it's great for you and it tastes great. It's a super clean product, so we're really happy about that. At this point, I want to bring on Varn, our Director of Storytelling, and how great he is. He's going to actually let me know if you guys had any questions. And then if you do right now have any questions, you certainly, it's not too late to send them in. I'd be happy to take any of your questions. Varn, are you there?
Great job, Karin. I sure am. So that was a ton of great information, and a handful of the questions that people had, you actually got to along the way. Some of them specifically in reference to using UCAN, but I had a couple that I'll pose to you. So one of the questions was, as you kind of touched on different the way you want to adjust your nutrition when you're kind of in peak training phase versus not peak training phase. Do you at all think about, in terms of percent of carbohydrates, protein, and fat, how you want to adjust that up and down when you're not in your peak training phase versus when you are?
Yeah, and here I have a slide back on that slide, and it's not as scientific. I know that sometimes people want the percent too, and what happens is when you see a dietitian, a sports dietitian, what they'll do is start by assessing where you're at right now, and this goes across the board for anybody asking kind of that same question as in percent. I don't like to stick with a hard percent, because then sometimes people get that number in their head, and especially, and we like to in sports with the data kind of keep that, you know, tucked away in our back pocket. So what we do is, as sports dietitians, we look at that and we see, okay, well, how are things going right now in your training? What needs to be changed? And that's where we actually ask you to keep a food diary and come in to us and share with us what you're eating now. And quite honestly, a lot of times it's just a matter of shifting those things around, because most of the time your plate doesn't look like this. You know, if you're doing breakfast and you're grabbing a cup of coffee and running out the door, your breakfast isn't going to look like this plate. So it's super important, and that's the easiest thing I can tell you to start out with, is try and build your meals at least around the same size. It keeps that furnace going. And these are kind of very rough estimates, about 50% of the plate. In this case, it looks like a little bit more. You know, a picnic plate could be 50% or so of the plate. You still have a piece of protein, whether it's meat or chicken or fish or something, it's about the size of your hand on the other portion, and about that half cup to a cup of hopefully high fiber carbohydrates on the other, loosely 25%. But again, this is going to change depending on where you started out from. So that's going to be very important to be assessed and see where you're at in your training, when you have the dips in energy throughout the day, and it's just that kind of playing with those numbers, even tweaking just a little bit. If I tell you to stick with 25 to 30% of high fiber carbs, what happens is a lot of people will stick there and then not really move from there, and your training could suffer. So if you are having issues or feel you're having issues, definitely recommend that you see someone to individualize that plan for you.
Yeah, I think it's a great overall perspective, Karin. It is so individual, and then it's also important throughout training to kind of just see how you feel and adjust based on that. So, you know, in the interest of time, we'll take one more question from Danny. Danny had a couple that were UCAN specific that I'll post to you. So, first one was he says he's using a UCAN bar to sustain fueling during a run. So, how often should he be eating the UCAN bars during the run if he chooses to carry those with him and have them during the run as well? What do you generally recommend, Karen? And then I've got some thoughts as well.
Well, God bless you, Danny, for being able to tolerate everything that's in a UCAN bar. Some of us, like me, can't have any protein and fat and things along, so it's great that you're able to do that. I typically tell people, like if you're at your desk and you're working, that UCAN bar is going to last you, about a couple hours, and they'll last you a little bit longer than you think it will, just because it does have the super starch in it. But if you're running and it's something that you're burning off pretty quickly, it might go a little faster than that. It might last you for about an hour or so. And that's where that scoop of UCAN, because it's more, the powder I'm talking about, because it's more concentrated, and there's actually more of it in a scoop of UCAN powder than there is in the bar, that's where you really get into kind of that 90 minutes or so. It'll last you longer. If you're a smaller person, it might last you 2 hours. And it also depends on how metabolically efficient you are, how used to being that hybrid car that I mentioned. So these are the things that, again, it kind of goes back to your training and playing with it. But you said, Varn, that you also had something to throw in there about that as well?
Yeah, I think kind of just getting feedback from some of the other runners and people of varying paces. There's a couple different approaches. So certainly having the entire bar, if you're going to use it as a pre-run snack, all at once, kind of about 30 minutes before that, that seems to work well. But then during the run, starting at maybe somewhere between an hour to 90 minutes in, you might cut up the UCAN bar in 3 or 4 pieces and just kind of have that every 20 minutes. So, Danny, that might be something you try as well. Instead of, having the UCAN bar all at once, is have, a quarter of it or half of it, at sort of over a short period of time, and then 30 or 45 minutes later have the other piece of it. So it's definitely a good option. And people ranging from 2 hour and 30-minute marathoners to 5 hour marathoners have told me they've done this. And then
Yeah, and
another
that's a
question
great
Danny
point.
had is
I
just,
definitely want to mention something on that point too, because some people are used to the UCAN bars, and maybe some are not so much. The cutting them up in pieces, I've heard that before, and it's a great idea. Make sure you do that on the front end and not near the end, because we're so in tune with getting quick carbs that UCAN's not a quick carb, so it'll take you some time to go through your stomach and then end up in your small intestine. So if you're taking it and you've got 45 minutes left in your run, and you're starting, or an hour in your run, then maybe try and start it a little bit before then, so that you'll have it available before the end of the run.
that's great. And then Danny's last question, and we'll end on this, is perhaps appropriate to end on this for Texas and the heat. In terms of hydration and the UCAN Hydrate, how often are you recommending people consume it, or how should they think about how often they need it throughout a run?
Well, and I'm just flipping through here to get to that hydrate slide here. I will tell you that this also depends on how salty of a sweater that you are, and that's where we kind of play with it as sports dietitians, because if you're a pretty salty sweater and you're coming to me and you've already told me that you have issues, not just with your blood sugar, but it's obvious that you're having some hydration issues based on the symptoms that you're telling me. And again, it's going to depend on the environment. Were you running in Houston in July? You went there for an event, or are you running in Colorado and at altitude? So it's going to kind of depend what your needs are. And in those cases, when your needs are a little bit higher, then maybe you're mixing in, a couple of packets of the hydrate into your water. Some people like it more concentrated and need it more concentrated, and others you can spread out. So typically we recommend like 8 to 10 ounces. There are the little packets, the little sachets of UCAN Hydrate, and it's a very small amount that's in there. It's a tiny little scoop if we're talking about the container, and that will get you through typically about an hour or so. And that's just kind of what I've seen based here in Texas. And I know, Varn, you're out in the Bay Area in San Francisco. Have you seen something different out there as well?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, a stick every hour or two is right on, and you kind of adjust that based on your individual needs and the climate. But Karin, with that, I think we really appreciate your time and everyone else's time here, and a ton of great info packed into an hour. So we will be sending the full recording out. We'll also send out Karin the full presentation that Karin put together for this out to you as well, so you guys can reference that. And as part of this, you all will get to try free UCAN snack bar. So stay tuned. Mitch Hayes will have more info there. And well, actually, you know what, Karin, we'll take one more from Gretchen, which I just saw, because why not? So Gretchen says, I've alternated GU and UCAN during long runs over 15 miles and found it works for me. Is this contradictory to the science? Thank you. And she also says, great talk. So that's a credit to you, Karin. So, Gretchen, I think first of all, the fact that it works for you is, is great in terms of how it works and what we would know about the science. Karin, I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah, so what I typically recommend, Gretchen, is just to try it. Try UCAN and see how you feel. Sometimes people feel, especially on their long runs, depending on how tall you are and how much metabolically active you are, your body, and how much of a hybrid car you are. Maybe a scoop and a half would do you well at the beginning, beforehand. It just depends, again, how tall you are too, and how much you're feeling that it lasts you. But what I recommend is to try that UCAN powder beforehand, see how long you can go, and then I start to say, okay, well, do you need a scoop and a half or 2 scoops? Because that curve of how long it's going to last is just going to be elongated. It's just going to keep going a little bit longer. And then, do you need that gel or goo at the very end? And sometimes for that mental, like, oh, hey, I'm going to do this sprint at the end and I really want my gel or goo, you can. But what I would like to do is get as many runners as I can to try the UCAN so that they're not having to rely on the gel and goo, because that's really the beautiful thing when you're out there and you're not a slave to those things. But try it to get your confidence level up on the UCAN. And I want to know how it worked for you, and I'm sure Varn wants to know how that worked for you to try and use the gel or goo at the end if you need it. Lots of people then find out, wow, I don't even need the gel or goo at all. So Varn, before you close out, I just want to say thank you to Mitch. You guys have a great resource at Run On. Mitch is extremely knowledgeable about all of this that I mentioned here as well, and he can answer your questions and direct your more difficult questions to me as well. If you still have questions after this, I'm happy to help out. But thank you so much to Run On for putting this together and for allowing us to talk to you about just general healthy marathon nutrition and long run nutrition.
And Gretchen, I'll sneak in one final point. For most people, like Karin was saying too, we point them towards start with UCAN, and then Karin, there was a slight hitch when you were talking about this. I'm not sure if people heard it, but towards the end, you use more of the fast-acting products or carb sources. So if you are going to use it optimally, what we'd say is that would be better versus having a gel and then trying to have UCAN a little bit after that. But that's the beauty of experimenting and training.
Yes.
So with that, guys, yeah, thanks to everyone. We'll be sending this out by email. You guys will get a chance to try a free UCAN bar. Stay tuned. In the next day or two, you'll get some details about how that all works. And in the meantime, thank you very much. Appreciate everyone's time, and had a great info, Karin. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much, everyone.